Welcome everyone! For the ones of you who don't know me yet, my name is Zucconi. I'm a lecturer in artificial intelligence and a science communicator. And if this is the first time you're watching, welcome to Gamedev Graveyard. This is the weekly show where we talk about games, prototypes, postmortems, and everything that is related to the world of, well, game development. And as always, if this is the first time you're watching or if you've been here before and you like this kind of content, please feel free to subscribe. It really helps. It really helps to grow. And I'm doing it once a week. It takes a lot of time, so that will really help. Now, oh, hi. We can see we have already some people in the chat. We actually have some likes already, and he hasn't even started yet. So thank you so much for the faith in these episodes. So we're going to have, but before I introduce the guests, we're going to have 1 hour, maybe a bit longer, relaxed chat. So if this is the type of content that you need right now, then please feel free to join and to stay around. As always, you can leave comments here in the chat, and I will be more than happy to read them and to ask them to the guests that we have today. And also, this is probably going to be your weekly dose of shady goodness, or probably your monthly dose, because we have something like 20 gigabytes of videos to show. And it's a lot. I don't know even if we have a chance to show it all, but if you're really interested in computer graphics, in shaders, in games, in particle effects, then this is the episodes that you were waiting for. And it's one actually I was very, very excited about. So, with that being said, the guest that we're going to have tonight or today, depending where you are, is Phi Dinh. He's the founder of Phi Games, unsurprisingly, and he's also the developer of a few games. One is TinyKeep, which maybe not of you know, but I'm sure that we will see something that probably all of you have seen related to TinyKeep. And the other game that probably everybody watching is waiting for is Recompile. It's an incredible game. I had a chance to play the demo. My laptop was on fire because there was so much going on. I need a new laptop to play games. But it's also coming out on PS5. And I honestly can't wait to play it. There is so much goodness inside. And hopefully we will have a chance to explore a bit of that. And Phi will be able to tell us how he managed to create such an awesome, unique and super rich aesthetic. Now, with that being said, let me introduce you to Phi. Hi Phi, how are you doing?
Hey Ellen, how's it going?
I'm melting. Even today's too hot.
Yeah, it's not too bad here. It's feeling pretty good.
So, do you want to introduce yourself and tell the viewers a bit of, what you do, what's the stuff you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm I guess, professionally a games programmer. I've been making kind of games for about 8, 9 years now. So at the minute, I run a independent game studio, Phi Games, which is based in Manchester, UK. And at the moment, we are working on a adventure game called Recompile. We've been doing so for the past kind of 3 or 4 years now, maybe even a bit longer than that. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
And I'm sure we'll be able to have a chance to talk about the long journey that is making a game, just because people think it's easy. So
No,
we are here to prove them wrong. We are here to discourage
fun,
people from
fun.
making games. So, do you want to tell a bit about Recompile while I'm showing the trailer?
Yeah, of course. So Recompile is it's essentially a 3D Metroidvania adventure game. It's kind of half open world, half Metroidvania, and it's all about hacking and creating sentient AI. So the premise of the game is you're a computer virus, and you've been kind of installed into this mysterious computer network, and you're not really sure why you're there or what your mission is. And then eventually you find out that you're the catalyst to create the first sentient AI. But what that means depends on how you play the game.
Oh, so does it mean that there are multiple paths, or or am I saying
Yeah,
or?
so there's actually multiple endings, and um, each ending kind of depends on how you approach the game. So, for example, you might kind of want to be an aggressive player and you go around kind of killing everything, or you might want to be more sneaky and kind of rely on stealth, or you might kind of want to create more of a chaotic environment, and so you kind of resort to hacking and changing the environment to kind of suit your playstyle. And what that means is that the type of AI that you create at the end of the game um, depends on these playstyles, and that also kind of dictates the narrative and the real world outside. So in Recompile, there's like kind of two stories happening. There's like one which is inside the computer, and then the thing well, that's kind of the story that you're playing. And then there's also the second story, which is what's happening in the real world outside the computer. And there's a kind of a whole um, war that's going on, a kind of apocalyptic future, and the kind of result of that and what happens to humanity depends on your actions inside the game.
That's actually quite cool. I didn't know that bit, so now I'm even more excited. So one thing that it's impossible to ignore from the game, it is aesthetic. It's absolutely stunning. It's really, really nice. I mean, it's exactly the kind of aesthetic that I want. And we're looking now at a few minutes of gameplay. And on top of having an amazing aesthetic, you also have the fake OS look, which I adore. Like every game that has a fake OS, I'm going to play it. I'm into it. So I think a question that for me is sort of natural is where did you got the inspiration from this kind of aesthetic? How did that came to be?
So I think I kind of initially, when you're making these type of games, you kind of look for kind of similar visual inspirations from films. So, for instance, big fan of The Matrix, Tron. There used to be an old kids' TV series called Reboot, where all the characters are inside this kind of virtual world called the mainframe, um, and then stuff like that is obviously an inspiration. But the main reason why the game looks the way it does is just through kind of evolution of the different versions that we've been working on over the past few years and what kind of suits us in terms of skill set. Like we don't have, a huge amount of experience in modeling like really, really complicated, detailed environments or characters. We don't particularly enjoy UV mapping everything and then creating like high resolution textures and so that's one of the reasons why we didn't want to make a realistic game and we want to go for something a bit more abstract. So when we set the game inside a computer, it's kind of given us the kind of aesthetic permission to say like we can make it look whatever the hell that we want it to look like, and it doesn't matter because it doesn't have to be realistic. And that kind of led to how it looks right now.
And I think this is actually a very good advice for a lot of people watching because sometimes you really want your game to have the best graphics that you can have, and I think that this is a very I know it's something that you should strive for if you have the chance, but often it takes so much effort, it takes so much energy to make something photorealistic, for example, that very often is not really worth it, and you ended up either spending a massive amount of budget on that or having a game that it doesn't look unique. So sometimes it's much better to have something that has a style, but so that has a style rather than being photorealistic. Aesthetics trumps photorealism every time, and I think that this game is really proof of that. It's not photorealistic, but it's absolutely stunning. So I'm quite
Thank
I'm
you.
quite obsessed with.
Well, I do have to say that I guess what I'm talking about is kind of closer to how the project started. Like when I was making it, I was the only programmer, artist, designer, etc. And then I met someone, and he was a animator and VFX artist, but we still didn't have a 3D modeler or environmental artist or even a character artist at the time. So um, the way that the kind of game looks now is based on very like simple, abstract, like even low poly art, but that and rendered by kind of modern techniques. So, like volumetrics and lights and complex custom shaders, that kind of thing. But now we do have artists on the team. But even so, we've kind of tried to stick to the original aesthetic, just because it kind of fits the way that we work.
And I think it's a very good choice. It definitely worked really well for the development of the game. So, as you probably know, a lot of the people watching it, I think it's because a lot of the people following me are interested in shaders. And this game packs so much in terms of shader coding, in terms of different shading techniques. And so the obvious question that I need to ask you when I'm looking at this game is how? how, how is all working? But no, beside the jokes, is where did you learn all those kind of techniques? Because I can see that I recognize some of those techniques. Like, for example, when you jump, you see the vertex displacements
Hmm.
of the terrain basically moving, which I'm thinking, okay, I know how to do this. But then I see some other things, like the way the character is rendered, for example, that it's all, I'm like, I would have no idea how to approach it. I need to really think about how to approach this. So the question is, where do you learn to make stuff look like this?
So I think like the answer to the question is like I never really set off learning how to write shaders or like become a technical artist or anything like that. It's always been like I wanted to create something in the game before I started learning shaders, and the only way that I knew how to create a certain effect was to, I don't know, move transforms directly, like game object transforms, or like kind of fake it somehow. And that always worked, and you can kind of see that working in some of the videos that you're going to show today. But you get to a point where performance is going to be an issue. Like you can't move hundreds and hundreds of cubes around without like losing frame rate. So then you kind of like, okay, let's do a bit of research. How do other games do it? Because clearly there is a proper way of doing things. And then you read stuff about vertex displacement and how graphics cards can decide where to render a particular vertex in world space without the actual CPU that the game engine knows about. And then you go, okay, that's cool. So that's, how do we do that? And we start looking at examples and, started looking at tutorials for shaders and especially one of the blogs that I was a big fan of was yours, Alan, and your shader tutorials.
Thank you so much.
So that's always very useful, like just kind of finding out how to move vertices around and how to change colors of meshes and stuff in real time without having to replace materials or updating material properties, for instance. Like we can actually do that all within the shader. And it's just like a learning process. I mean, I've only been learning shaders for about 2 years now. And most of the stuff that you see in Recompile, I learned how to do within the first kind of month of learning how to write shaders, right? I mean, like the stuff like the fog of war, the shockwave effects when you crash land, the shaders that are powering the VFX, they're all done within, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of me learning how to work with shaders. And I think like I totally not the exception. Like I always thought shaders was like a black magic, like a crazy thing that nobody really understood. But once you actually look into it, it's just programming. It's just maths. You have functions that you call, you have inputs and outputs, and you can keep testing and tweaking until things look right. There's not necessarily a science, it's more of an art for me anyway.
So for the people watching, let me repeat this. All those shaders, you could do them in 2 weeks. And now, of course, maybe that's a bit of a joke, but I think you hit definitely the right point. The fact that shaders are often mysterious because there aren't as many resources around, And because they're not coded in C sharp, which is fairly friendly, they tend to be coded in more obscure dialects like CG, and all the kind of stuff. And they're not super compatible between different platforms. So there's all sort of issues working with shaders. But at the very end, they are technically very simple. It's just that the way you write them, it's crazy. So that is what makes them a bit harder. I mean, watching now some of your sketches that shows how you achieved all the effects layer by layer. And this is something really cool, that even something that might look very complicated, if you take it down and you analyze it step by step, effect by effect, they are actually done with very simple things. They're just layered on top of each other. And
Yeah.
adding this complexity is what actually makes them look so sophisticated and so well crafted. But yeah, I was while I was editing the videos that you sent me together, I was like, I should not watch them, otherwise I will never get this done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I have to say is that when you're starting with shaders, you don't need to know how everything works. Like, there's a ton of syntax in shader code, like CG or HLSL or whatever. Like, when you look at a shader that someone else has written, you don't necessarily need to understand what every keyword means. All you need to do is just tweak a variable here and there, and then see what happens. Like, the good thing about shaders is you can compile them at one time if you like, and then you can see, things changing. So you keep doing that, you keep practicing, and eventually you'll kind of come across some cool effect and go, oh, this is cool. I didn't intend to do this, but this is where we are.
So I know that the game is coming out basically on everything that has a GPU. So it's coming out on PC, it's coming out on PS5, it's coming out on the Xbox Series X. So the obvious question is, how do you manage all those different versions? How do you manage, especially to write shaders that tend to be quite finicky, to work on so many different platforms? What is your process about that?
So actually, this is the first time that we've ported a game that I've worked on into a platform other than PC. And as far as I know, like, I think with previous generation consoles, um, were a lot more difficult, a lot more complicated, and a lot more kind of mysterious as a way. Um, but I think with the current generation consoles and the next gen, they're much more similar to PCs now. And with the new next gen stuff, it's regular graphics cards, regular CPU architecture. Nothing's too much different from a PC that you're used to programming on. So with that in mind, when we kind of looked at what the capabilities were with Unity and how they supported platforms, it's actually, in terms of shaders and rendering, there is not a lot that we have to do. There's a few keywords here and there that are probably not supported, but other than that, it's not a huge amount of work. Most of the work that comes with porting comes with supporting the platform APIs,
Saving systems
integrating.
and stuff.
Yeah, TLC, like integrating with services and achievements or rewards and things like that. And that's the kind of thing that takes time. Saving or loading, for instance, like kind of accessing um, storage, internal storage for saving your games. Like that stuff is the stuff that takes the longest. So actually, the person who's porting Recompile at the minute is not myself. It's another developer who recently joined the team this year. His name is Alex Rose. You may know him from kind of games like Rude Bear, and he's won a lot of game jams on a lot of Dare. And he's been working on porting Recompile to the various different platforms. But as far as I know, like the most difficult things are kind of integrating services, not necessarily the shader stuff. So that's a kind of a blessing for us.
Yeah, I I wish I was so lucky when I was making games. I remember working on a game for PC, PS4, and PS Vita, and it was so stressful because a lot of the shader stuff was not was not working that great across the three different platforms. So it's great to know that things are going, in a direction where it's easier. And of course, kudos to Unity for making sure that the shaders support works across the platform, because I think they have a big responsibility over
Yeah.
that. And on that, if it managed to work, it's amazing. I think they've done a great job. Now, we also have a few people in the chat watching the stream. So let me just say hi to Mr. Tira69, Harmin Tab, Tabatabai. I hope I said it correctly.
Harming.
Oh, I'm so bad with pronunciation with names. Sorry about that. But we've done 20 of those streams. You know that I'm really bad at pronouncing names. CAU, Harry Elisavakis. Hi, Harry. And he's also mentioning Shadow Lab has like three different syntaxes in there. Yes. One thing that makes writing shaders in Unity stressful for me is that they have so many different syntaxes together at the same time. So it's not just CG, it's a lot of different ones. And it's very confusing. I think it makes it so much more confusing than a single one. Armin said I tried at least to pronounce the name. If you send me the the pronunciation, I promise I will learn it. But it's just to be tricky to do it live, I guess. So we are watching a lot of the sketches that the videos that you send me about the different effects in the game, and I see you have even stuff like marching cubes and stuff like that. So what was your intention with adding so many different effects? Were you just experimenting and see where it goes, or you had a specific aesthetic in mind? What was the development like?
So I think part of it was when I approach a feature or a particular visual requirement in the game, I'm always trying to think like, what is the most difficult way to accomplish what I'm trying to do, and then go for that. um,
Of course, right? Like a
but
true
so, for example,
programmer.
like crash landing the player onto the ground. Like I didn't want to do just VFX, and we did try just VFX, and it felt good. It felt okay. And then we added audio to it, and that felt great. And then we added screen shake, which was adds that kind of game feel. But then when I look at films like The Matrix, where you see Neo kind of crashing into the ground, and all of the Agent Smiths kind of flying out of the sphere, you think, okay, well, if you look at those scenes, you can see the ground actually warping and being manipulated with Neo's physics. And all of the kind of Agent Smiths are basically physics objects that are being kind of exploded out. So we wanted to make the player feel powerful, like, like if they were Neo. So then I kind of researched on, how do I do vertex displacement? How do I work time scale into that? And then integrate that with physics and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of like how I decided to do that. For something like marching cubes, there's a sequence in the game, a kind of an introduction sequence where I wanted to fly through like an infinite space. And instead of like a star field or something simple like that, it would be cool if we could get infinite terrain. That kind of looked a bit abstract. So I researched kind of voxels and terrain generation and stuff, and that kind of led me down the whole marching cube route, which is what you can see on the screen at the minute.
And I think this part to me looks incredible. I'm kind of curious, how can you guarantee that you're not going to have anything eating your path in a marching cubes stuff? What was your approach? Like, can you actually fly freely from that?
Yeah, so in part of the video there, you can see the player is actually flying through there, and it's complete freedom. So we can actually create collision meshes for these marching cubes. Even though they're on GPU, we can still create mesh colliders in CPU, especially with the Neo Mesh kind of APIs with the latest version of Unity. Everything's really, really quick now. And for that sequence, we let the player kind of go through itself. But the secondly as well is if we have a fixed seed, then the generated terrain is always the same. So we can always, throw away bad seeds and make sure that the generated terrain that we get is a good one. Um, there's another sequence as well where it's kind of almost pre-recorded. You can see that in the kind of wireframe
Mm.
graphics that you might have shown in your clips. And that's kind of pre-recorded so that we know that it works every time.
Yeah, you also mentioned something about feeling as powerful as Neo in the Matrix, and
Yeah.
this is true. Something I've noticed, even just playing the demo, that I think it's still available online. You have this slow progression where the character slowly becomes more and more powerful, up
Mhm.
to the point where basically they can fly, and it's so rewarding because suddenly you feel all the power. You can stop time. You can do all this kind of stuff, and it does feel rewarding. It does feel like a really good going up in power. Now, I don't believe that in the final game you can get that level of upgrade in the 50 minutes of the demo. I I think it's probably going to be to last a bit longer. Otherwise, I don't know how I would solve the levels. But it does indeed keep that feeling of power. It's interesting because in terms of visual look, it doesn't look like the Matrix at all. But in terms of feeling, now that you say it, it does feel like you have that kind of ground shaking, groundbreaking power. And I think that this is really something that you crafted very well in the game. We also have a few other messages from William Morris Julian saying hi, Fee, hi Alan, hi. And also
Cool.
one from Mitch McClellan saying, I'm always impressed when you pronounce my last name perfectly, Alan. So, Mitch, what you probably don't know is that one of my colleagues has McClellan as a last name. So I'm sort of used to that. Otherwise, it would have been a bit harder for me to get the last name right, I guess. But so I see that you also been using a lot of sort of experimental features. For example, like the animation rigging package
Hmm.
that is new in Unity, which also means that I have a tutorial on inverse kinematics in 3D that I need to release soon before Unity makes that non-experimental. Otherwise, I'm out of business. So I have to fight against time. But and I also know that you've been switching from Unity 5.6 to HDRP. How was your experience with that?
Interesting. It was one of the longest kind of 3 months of my career, I guess. No, seriously though, it was we did start making Recompile in Unity 5.6, I believe. And that's the kind of version that you can play as a demo right now, I
Hmm.
believe. Um, but then obviously when we had kind of next gen requirements, we needed to look into more sophisticated lighting. We wanted to experiment with stuff like ray tracing, um, and kind of getting more faster volumetrics, that kind of thing. Like we, especially going for next gen consoles, the requirement was like we do need to upgrade Unity, and it was the best time then to say, okay, let's have a look at this new thing that Unity has been marketing for quite a while, and that's the high definition render pipeline. Um, and aside from making things look amazing, it's also uh, a really good way to improve the performance of your game if you're using so many lights and shadow casters and volumetrics and that kind of stuff. It scales a lot better if you're using those kinds of effects. So we upgraded from 5.6 to 2018, and then 2019, and then to the latest version now, which is, I believe, 2019.3 or dot .4 or something. And what that involved was basically rewriting the entire project again, which sounds crazy, but it's something that we're pretty used to doing. Like this is like the fifth time we've written the game, and most of it included like writing all of the shaders again in shader graph, because that was the recommended way to author shaders in HDRP. is using shaded graph and not manually coding it. So it was a great opportunity for me to then learn how to use that as well, which was cool. And actually, it wasn't as much as a pain as I thought it would be. We managed to get all of the old VFX particle system prefabs, copy and paste it over into the new project, and then there was only a few tweaks to that my artist had to do to make that work with HDRP. So it wasn't difficult. It just took a lot of time, and we're still doing it now.
I imagine, and I know a few other developers that have been switching pipelines, and they've been quite terrified by the idea of having to rewrite everything. As
I mean, the
probably,
only thing that I could say is that I think what made it doable for us is that we did rewrite the project from scratch with the new methodology in mind. If you are just upgrading a old project that is already in like late production to HDRP and then try and kind of fix it and expect it to work, that may be a little bit more difficult to do, I would imagine.
yes, knowing from the desperation that some people are having, yes, but this is not because of HDRP, and this is because when you're late in production and you change something, it's always a bit of drama. I was honestly quite surprised by Unity decision to split the pipelines. And don't
Hmm.
get me wrong, I understand that different devices need different performance. I had different performance issues, so that makes sense. What to me was a bit of a weird sort of hit and miss decision was probably the idea of going for two completely different pipelines that in a way that it wasn't transparent. I think what they could have done probably is just having a switch from this to this pipeline, and it works straight away. Instead, they decided to have completely different workflow, which means that you cannot switch in between a project without pain and suffering. And maybe it's also, and I think that with shaded graphs, it should be possible because
Mm.
you just have a visual representation of the code, but then the actual code should be translated based on which pipeline you're using. So it's something that it was technically possible, but I don't know why they've decided to go for this weird split approach, which I think made it a bit messy. I don't know if you had any insight into that.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say is that the split, I think what you're referring to is the URP, which is Universal Render Pipeline, and HDRP, the high definition one,
Yeah.
and how if you're looking at next gen, then you should go for HDRP. If you're looking at
Hmm.
low end devices like mobile or Switch, then you should use URP. And obviously, that does mean the developer has then to decide how do I make a game that works for both platforms. You know, but actually, if you look into it under the hood, both URP and HDRP are based off the same scriptable render pipeline. So there are actually quite a few similarities between the two. And one of those is being able to use shader graph for both. Um, and the way the post processing kind of stack, the workflow is very, very similar. So a potential solution to that is you could split your project into like three parts where you have a core kind of gameplay part, and then you have like your two rendering projects, so one for HDRP and one for URP, and then you can kind of sim link them together, and then you'd have a kind of ultimate Uber project that works for both platforms. But it's yeah, you're right, it's not an easy solution, and until something like mobile or Switch could support HDRP, then I think it's going to be a problem for developers. I mean, you could always stick with a legacy pipeline that works for any platform, so you could also do that if you wanted to.
So, a big advice to people choosing names for stuff: don't call something standard or universal, because it's going to become legacy standard. And I'm pretty sure that in a few years we will have legacy universal. so, so, as an advice, knowing how rapidly stuff changes, especially in video games, especially in computer graphics. Don't call something standard or ultimate, or they sound more like marketing names rather than actual technical names. Give it a number. Number is always fine. Maybe not a date either.
I
And
mean,
yeah,
as far as I know, the universal render pipeline can export to all platforms. You just don't get the high definition features, which is also another solution. Like I think they're planning on having URP be the standard one that's taken over what Unity was beforehand. So yeah,
we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm hearing conflicting statements from you. Not from you, but in general. But we'll see. So while we're talking, we're also watching videos of the previous versions of what Recompile originally was, because I know that you've been working on this game probably since 2014, right?
yeah, that's right.
So do you want to guide us through the different incarnations of the game?
Yeah, I mean when I first wanted to make this game, I knew that I wanted to make the game that's inside a computer, some kind of virtual world where you're a player, maybe a human, or stuck inside a computer, because that's the kind of stories that I really loved reading about when I was growing up as a kid or watching. Um, so that the concept has always been the same, but the kind of execution and the prototypes and the gameplay, I've been kind of experimenting over the years. Like the first one was a turn-based puzzle strategy type thing where you can't move the player, but you can only shift the environment around to move your obstacles. And then the idea is that you then complete that stage and then you're able to move on to the next node. And it's kind of like a roguelike type thing. And that looked really cool. And I really enjoyed kind of messing about with that. But then I realized that I'm really bad at puzzle games and I really can't design puzzles. Um, so like to base the whole game on a puzzle was like really, really bad idea for me. I mean, I could have got a puzzle designer to help, but at the time it was just me working on it. And then the second version was a little bit more similar to what Recompile is now. It's more of a kind of action shooting type thing, but it was an isometric based, kind of faux isometric based viewpoint. Um, and I worked on that for maybe like 6 months. And I also did all of the artwork, all the design and programming. And then I realized that I really didn't want to do everything anymore, because the animations that I did and the modeling and the character designs and stuff like that was at the limit of what I could do in terms of programmer art. Like I couldn't do any better than that. So for version two, it was like if I wanted to carry on doing that, I would never be happy with the result because it's not an experienced artist working on those assets. Um, so I ditched that for version three, which um, is very, very similar to the second version, but all of the graphics were just placeholder cubes. And that kind of really gave me the freedom to not worry about how the game looked, and let me focus on like level design, puzzles, mechanics, um, that kind of thing, without having to worry about getting it to look good. Um, and then whenever I would be able to find an artist to help me, then we could convert those cubes to something a little bit better.
No, please don't. Cubes are amazing. like, it's actually something I suggest to my students all the time. Like, okay, you can spend millions of years making your own assets, but if you just know how to use cubes properly, you're done. Just make games with cubes, and everybody's going to be happy if you know how to do them nicely. And actually, the version three looks really, really cool. We have it on screen right now. So something else that it's kind of interesting to me is that the original title for this sort of project was Ford Mainframe, which first of all I think it really shows what the game was about. I guess I think it's a really good name to get that. How did it switch from Ford Mainframe to Recompile?
I mean, like Fort Mainframe was cool, but I don't think it had that kind of ring to it, and it doesn't really describe Fort Mainframe describes the place of where the game is set. But what I wanted to do was come up with another name where it's an action or a verb, and that's something that has many different meanings and not just one meaning. So for Recompile, we decided that it was, um, the player recompiles the world, the computer is recompiled to become sentient. Um, I don't want to get into spoiler territory, but the outside world, the Earth, the planet that you're living on is recompiled in different ways depending on how you play. And then you can recompile yourself to create different um, abilities and mechanics and kind of character builds depending on how you want to play as well. So like I think there's a lot of meaning to the word, and we also wanted to have a game where it's just one word as well, rather than two words.
And
Um,
I find it kind of interesting because suddenly the way it gives a new meaning to acquiring new abilities. In all those kind of games, you acquire new abilities, right? But usually it's like, oh, you found this suit, you found this device, you found these rockets, this jetpack, and here instead you're recompiling yourself. So you're basically giving yourself that ability by literally augmenting your own source code. I think it gives a completely uh, new meaning to the idea of acquiring abilities. And also, um, I'm always fascinated by the names that projects have originally. Like
yeah,
when you create a game, before creating a game, you create a project in Unity, in Unreal, whatever. And what names do you give to that project when you're not sure what the game is about yet? So I'm always fascinated by stuff like robot game, you know, or, or like rocket game, or
yeah.
sport
These
game,
test game.
test game 15. So it's always nice to see.
I think like the code names or project names that I often use the most are probably like genres of games. Like I know I want to make a puzzle game, so I'll call it puzzle test or 4X strategy test or platformer one, platformer two, or 3D platformer one, 3D platformer two, that kind of thing. But for this specific game, like I knew that I wanted the game to be set inside a computer mainframe. And I wanted the place to be a foreboding, kind of intimidating castle, if you like, where you have to infiltrate it as a virus. So that kind of led to the words Fort Mainframe. But I am glad that we kind of moved to Recompile because it has, a lot of benefits for marketing as well.
Yeah, I think it sounds stronger in that
Yeah.
sense. You know, it sounds a bit more concise, I guess. So you also mentioned something about the state of the world in Recompile without making spoilers. Now, I know that Recompile has a sort of prequel, if we can say so, which is Nuclear Autumn, and surprisingly, I completely forgot about this game. But when you sent me the video, I was like, I've played this game. So it was, it's one of those things that
Oh
you
wow.
completely forget, and I'm glad that I sort of remember about his entry. Do you want to talk a bit about Nuclear Autumn as well?
Yeah, I think at the time it was interesting because I just finished working on TinyKeep, and at the time everyone was asking me like, what's my next game going to be? Is it going to be procedurally generated? Is it what kind of procedure generation you're going to use for the next game? It's like I really didn't want to do anything to do with procedure generation anymore. Like I'd been to Nordic Game Conference to do a talk there about it. We went to the Netherlands to everything procedural, and like I really had enough of creating levels that way. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to create a pixel platformer where I get to design the levels and not worry about technology and just make something fun and kind of narrative based, if you like. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's almost like a protest. Like, I don't want to talk about procedural stuff anymore, even though that's kind of what I was known for at the time. I just want to make a small game where I get to design literally everything. So that's kind of how Nuclear Autumn started. And the game is about you're a kind of a scientist and you're exploring this abandoned facility, like a military or government facility, with the premise that you're supposed to reactivate a doomsday weapon. And there's a twist in the game, and actually, it's not a weapon, it's something else entirely. I don't want to spoil too much if you want to play the game, but essentially, you kind of save the world instead of destroy it. And part of that kind of led to me thinking, okay, so there's a sequence in there's a section in the game where you're turning on a computer, and that lasts like literally 1 second. what if that 1 second was another game in itself? What if the scientist in Nuclear Autumn has a computer virus on a USB stick, inserts it into the computer, and then is able to take over the facility? What if that moment in time is the entirety of Recompile? And that's how that started.
So does it mean that people will need to play Nuclear Autumn before playing um, Recompile?
No, I think you. So we are actually injecting a lot of Nuclear Autumn lore into Recompile, so you don't need to play it, but it is kind of if you think of it like a spin-off or like a parallel kind of experience. Nuclear Autumn is about the events happening in the outside world, whereas Recompile is the events happening on the inside of the computer.
Nice.
Um, and there's also a possibility that we may think about either remaking it or re-releasing the game as a kind of a bundle thing. That would be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be quite nice. Now I'm kind of tempted to go back to it and spend the evening. I have so much work to do, but now I really want to replay it and having that experience again. So we also have a few comments. So Armin says, I think the migration to dot burst will be even harsher. Yes, it's a complete different way in which you redo stuff. As far as I know, Unity, I remember they clearly mentioned that they wanted everything to become ECS dot burst in the end. I don't think that's realistic.
I don't think they will even enforce that.
No.
The developers that I've spoken to at Unity, from my personal experience, have told me that I can use dots or burst or that kind of methodology to create stuff that's kind of appropriate for it, and it can exist alongside regular Unity. We don't have to create dots in everything. Like obviously, if you're creating dots physics, then they can't talk to normal physics or something like that. But I think there are problems that dots can solve, and there are problems that regular, programming and components will solve, like mono behaviors will solve better than dots. It just depends on what you're trying to do. I'm really excited personally. Like the kind of games that I want to make in the future probably involve like hundreds or thousands of enemies or IK animated huge monsters that have 1,000 bones or something like that that can really benefit from that kind of parallel kind of computation. And so something like Dots is really exciting because it allows me to do that without digging too deep into kind of parallel programming. So I'm excited about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah. I hit a bit of a wall when playing with it because it was a bit more complicated, but also it was a couple of years ago. So maybe now,
Yeah.
maybe now it's a bit better. I hope it was just pure, basically coding and memory management. So I was like, maybe I will wait a bit longer before going back onto it. So we also have a few proper questions. So Mitch is asking, did you have plans to refactor the project as you developed, or is it more organic, like you hit too many walls, then decided to do a rewrite?
I think it's just like it's something that I think every programmer has that instinct. Like once they've done the fun stuff, prototyping a game, making it look good, polishing a demo, they've learned so many different things about making games and about themselves and about their own skills that it's just easier to start again, and creating a entirely new thing from scratch. And I gave into that like 5 times. Um, so I never had plans to like refactor the game into 5 different versions over time. Like that's just something that happened. Obviously, once you're kind of into full production and you're not prototyping anymore and you're kind of fully funded by a publisher or investor or whatever, then it's less sensible to do that unless you really want to annoy people that you're working with. Um, but we obviously we had to again to get to HDRP. That was we didn't really have a choice with that, but I never planned to refactor it. It just happens, and a lot of my game development instinct is purely based on like personal feelings and not any scientifically or engineering kind of structure to it. It's just like, oh, I feel like I'm gonna rewrite this because it's fun. As long as we kind of hit deadlines on time, then I think that's fine.
It sounds sensible, it's I think it's the right word to use in this sense. Like sometimes I think that when you start a project and this project has a lot of experimentation in it, it's going to be messy. It's obviously going to be messy because you're learning, you're doing things that you haven't done before, you don't know which approach is better. So obviously stuff will be messy. And that's okay because you're still exploring. Um, I would say perhaps if your game has some very experimental features like the aesthetic, like the procedural generation stuff, maybe do a project in which you play with those kind of stuff separately as tools, as experiments. When you know that they work, bring them into a more sensible,
Mhm.
a more coherent project. Because otherwise, the problem is that you will end up with this monstrosity, not knowing which assets are useful, which assets are not. And Unity is really good at knowing which assets need to be imported, so that's not necessarily a problem. You can have a project of 50 terabytes, and Unity will still only include the stuff that it's needed most of the time. That's done really well. But you probably won't know, which means that you will keep these gigantic projects without knowing, oh my god, do I delete this file and destroy everything? So it's always, I think, better to have separate things for experiments and then bringing them back in a way that makes sense. At least, that's how we tend to work on more experimental um, things. We also have a question from William Morris Julian asking, how did you develop your narrative structure and story?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because we've gone through different iterations of how we want to present the story and the narrative to the players. And I think initially we wanted the game to be much more of a kind of a branching narrative, similar to kind of narrative games like I don't know, even like Bandersnatch on Netflix or kind of narrative books, if you like. Those what they called visual novels type thing,
Mm.
where you make a decision and then it branches off into a different thing. So we did originally prototype our story in Twine, um, because of the way that the game is. You're making decisions based on your play style, and that could give you a different ending. Um, but recently, now we're kind of a lot more freeform now, and we don't want to prescribe the player too much in terms of narrative. Like we want to have the world a little bit more open, a little bit more flexible, and it's more about how the player writes a story for themselves. So currently, we don't have that kind of twine mindset as we used to. That said, there is still the story of the world outside of the game, and that's kind of an interesting thing because the game is actually set over 1 second of real time. So it's very difficult to tell a story with of the outside world if it's only happening in 1 second. So we kind of have to use a lot of different tricks of the characters on the outside world sending messages that are pre-programmed, and we have to make sure that we're consistent with that. Um, but essentially, like we don't want to tell the story through things like too many cutscenes or dialogue or any dialogue at all, really, and have the entire story just be almost like an optional thing where you're getting messages from the outside world and you can choose to like read them or not. That's kind of up to you. You can find these kind of snippets of lore, these kind of programs around the world, and they tell a story of the world outside. And you do that enough, you kind of get a bigger picture of the overall universe. And kind of, I think for me, that's the kind of storytelling that I really enjoy.
And before you were mentioning, oh, the idea I'm injecting a virus in a computer, and the game takes place in an entire cycle, and I'm like, oh my god, it really is like that. And I think it's kind of interesting. I didn't thought about that. And I think now it gives an entire different feeling to the game. The fact that at the end you're actually a program inside this computer, so it makes sense that everything goes at a sort of speed. And as a programmer, I can confirm that this is exactly what's going on inside a computer. It works exactly like that.
Absolutely.
Oh God, what was that movie? Um, Tron? No, there was another one. Was it Tron? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, but programs are people.
absolutely. I mean, that's what I was led to believe when I first saw Tron for the first time. You know, we all have motorbikes and we have lasers and stuff in there, and it's all good times.
Not good educational content. So, Armin is actually another question. Can we hear more about the audio and music implementation in the game? I hear there was a lot of design and engineering gone into it. So, Armin, I usually never talk about audio because I know nothing about audio, but thank you for asking. I should ask more about audio to the guests that come on the show, so thank you for the question.
Yeah, so with audio, we are using some middleware to help, and that is wise. So with Unity, you can use either the inbuilt Unity audio, or you can go for middleware, and most people choose either Fmod or Wise. So we went for Wise just because the software and the tools provided are a lot more in line with our workflow. So actually, Richard Evans, he's also on the team. He is responsible for both the music implementation and sound design. And for sound design, it's pretty straightforward. I will go in and attach a thing called audio events, which is, for example, player jumps, and that gets fired to the middleware for variable events. So that in Wise, they're called RTPCs. These are kind of parameterized events that I can send to the engine as well. For example, how fast the player is running, or I don't know, the time scale of the game, or that kind of thing. And that also gets sent. So I do as much as I can with that based on a spreadsheet that me and Richard have agreed on, and then that's it on my side. And then maybe a week later, I grab Richard's branch of source control, and suddenly all the sounds are in the game, and it's great. That's kind of a really big benefit to having middleware like Wise. You can kind of, as a programmer, just send off audio events and then not have to worry about how the audio actually sounds or works. And then it's up to the audio designer to then just go in and create that audio. And it's amazing, like I wake up one day and suddenly there's sound in the game, and it's like all perfectly mixed, perfectly mastered. I didn't really have to do a lot at all. With music, it's a little bit more involved for me, because the music that we want for Recompile, we want to have a kind of a dynamic or adaptive soundtrack. So depending on how the player behaves, or what areas to explore, or what kind of situations the player in gets into, like combat or exploration or that kind of thing, we want the soundtrack to dynamically react to what's happening on screen. And that's like nothing new, obviously lots of games do that. Um, but the cool thing about Recompile is Richard actually is recently got a PhD in games audio, and in particular dynamic audio, dynamic music in games. So that's what his thesis was all about. And what we're trying to accomplish through the game is for the audio engine to remember what's been played in the past and make decisions based off that in order to play music for what's happening right now. So instead of a player walks into a combat situation, we play the combat music. It's a little bit more involved in that. We know a history of what the player has done in the past, and then we use those things to make a decision about what we can play now. And that kind of leads itself to something that works a lot more like a movie, in a way that the entire soundtrack from beginning to end tells a specific musical story that fits the narrative within the game, rather than just the music reacting purely on what's happening right now. So that's kind of most interesting thing that we're working on.
It's really interesting, and I've been trying to do procedural audio for a couple of games I worked on. It's hard. It's really hard. So, I think that this is a really good approach. Now, we also have a message from Anton Kudin. Hi, Anton. Anton is actually the developer of Megasphere. It's a game I love. He has, I think, the best pixel art ever made, ever.
I agree.
Sometimes I look at Anton's stuff and I'm like, no,
Yeah, if you
no.
want a good example on how to combine pixel art with dynamic lighting, and Megasphere is the game for that.
So yeah, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with that. And is sorry for the shout out, Anton. We he asking something that I wanted to ask as well. He says those text effect, shock emoji. So as you probably know, I am absolutely obsessed with fake UIs and fake OS systems. Every game that has them, I love the aesthetic. Maybe because I'm a kid from that era. So I learn computers, how to use computers on like DOS machines.
Yeah.
So I love that. I'm beyond obsessed. So how do they work? Because I see, of course, a lot of Sims animations. That's fine. How do you do the transition, the effects? How? Tell me how.
So it's a pretty long story, I guess. Like I'll try and keep it
We have
concise,
time
but
for UIs. We have time.
um, so I tried to do some of these effects in Unity using, Unity Text or Text Mesh Pro, with kind of varying success. Really, I mean, it's not Unity isn't really built to create interfaces like this. And I knew I wanted this kind of aesthetic because kind of fits the game, fits the theme. Like you said, I've also grown up with kind of DOS commands and those kind of console terminals and then movies like Alien and things like that and Hackers and all that. Like I really really love that aesthetic, so I wanted to recreate it. So Recompile UI system is actually called FiOS, and it doesn't use Unity's. Sorry, it doesn't use Unity's UI system at all. Like we don't even use like one thing. I think we use one thing, which is like one image component to render it to screen. But apart from that, we don't use the text components or buttons or anything like that. Everything is like completely custom made, and the way it works is actually a mesh, like a grid, where every letter that you can see on the screen is a quad of two triangles. So there's like 110 by 44, I think, which is like the size of the grid. And we use pixel fonts to render each letter on screen onto a additive material. And then to change the colors, we use vertex colors. So we change that on the fly. And to change what character we want to appear on a particular point on the grid, we mess about with the UVs in real time. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So in order to get like transitions between one vector to another, we literally just in real time set a cell of a certain XY coordinate to a UV for that particular texture in the font.
So I think I don't know, I find this insane. The fact that to replicate a style that was done out of lack of resources, we need to do so much just to make sure that everything just to make sure that we replicate something that was done on a computer that are like 16 kilobytes of RAM. I don't know. I find this so surreal. Sophie, despite all the audio drama that is plaguing us today, you've been working on another game that not many people know about, but in a specific circle is being quite famous, and is TinyKeep. Do you want to talk a bit about TinyKeep?
So TinyKeep was probably my first game that I created professionally. I used to work for a design agency close to London, but I really wanted to make games, so I started my own Kickstarter project, and that was TinyKeep. It's a dungeon crawling roguelike physics-based thing, where you go around and you have to escape a dungeon, and there's lots of kind of things you can do, like push enemies onto traps and have sword fights and that kind of stuff.
Just to make sure, can people still
And
hear
part of
you?
that
Wait,
Kickstarter
just a
campaign
second.
was showing a lot of Unity devs and other game devs on how we did the procedure generation for the game. And I guess that kind of took off and was the reason, or a big reason, why the campaign was funded. And then that was successful, and yeah, I could make that as my first game, and that kind of led to where I am now.
Nice. So, as I was mentioning, TinyKeep is overall a tiny game. I don't think he had millions of players, but there are a few players that a few demographics that actually went absolutely crazy with something revolves about a game. And trust me when I say that you might have not heard TinyKeep, but you have most likely heard, you've probably seen some of the GIFs that Phi made for this game because they were used everywhere about procedural generation. So if you study procedural generation at any level at college, it's likely you have seen some of the videos we have on screen now. So do you want to talk a bit about those videos and the procedural generation in general in the game?
Yes, I just wanted to create dungeons, and a lot of resources that I looked up were all kind of bottom up. So you start with a room, and then you build a corridor from that going in some direction, and then you build another room, and that kind of worked. It was cool, but it ended up being either you end up with a tree format or a tree kind of shape, and then in order to get loops, you have to then use some kind of pathfinding to create cycles or loops. And the result that you'd get at the end is very, very variable. Like sometimes you could get a really nice dungeon layout, sometimes you get something that's really dodgy based on, these kind of random parameters that you set for bottom up style generation. So I was wondering, like, how could you create a dungeon with a more top down methodology? So, have start with a layout or a shape of the entire world and then join them together with corridors. So the first thing that I thought, okay, how do I get rooms to generate in a kind of a nice pattern and not have them overlap? I could just generate them all in random places and then delete any overlapping rooms, but then it was very difficult to control how many rooms I wanted to generate. So I had the idea where I could use the inverse square law, which is a way to repel objects in physics. So I actually literally just used that and applied them to a bunch of rooms that spawned in the middle. What that does is that it kind of pushes out all of the rooms into kind of a nice shape. And that way I could guarantee that I would have the exact number of rooms that I wanted with no overlaps. And then from there, I could then use some graphing algorithms. So we used Delaunay triangulation to get a nice uniform triangulation between all of the rooms. And then we used the minimal spanning tree to give myself the minimum amount of corridors for that graph. And then we bring back the small percentage of redundant corridors. And that gave us a very, very consistent and aesthetically pleasing dungeon layout, no matter what parameters you fed into it. And it's pretty simple kind of series of steps, but it worked really well and it was really, really fast.
Yeah, I have a comment from Mitch saying, "Oh, absolutely recognize those," referring to the gifs of the procedural
Yeah,
generation stuff. Yes, they've been used everywhere. Every time you talk
yeah.
about PCG in dungeons, you see some of those, and it's
I think
kind.
like the Kickstarter was doing like okay, and then I decided to post a tutorial of how I did the procedure generation onto I believe it was Gamedev Reddit, like subreddit, and then I think it was like the top viral Reddit post for that week or something, and a ton of people then donated to the Kickstarter. So it was because of that that I was successful, which is pretty crazy.
So for once, something good came out of Reddit. Who could? Who would have thought that? It's good to hear that at least Reddit did something nice for once. So we also see that you've done a 3D version, if that's a thing. In another
Yes,
game of yours called Sublevel Zero, which you have on screen now. Do you
correct.
want to
Yeah.
talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it was a game jam that we worked on with a friend of mine, Luke Thompson and Gary, um, and yeah, basically we wanted to make Descent, but a roguelike. So if you remember the 90s game Descent, 6 degrees of freedom, it's kind of like Doom, but you can look up and down and rotate in any way direction that you want. But all of the levels were kind of designed statically, so we wanted to make a procedurally generated version of Descent and make that into a roguelike in VR. And so Luke asked me to join the team and for my procedure generation experience and try and create something similar to TinyKeep, but in full 6 degrees of freedom in 3D. So actually, I took the same algorithm. I created rooms, pushed them out using physics, used similar 3D Delaunay triangulation, minimal spanning tree, all of that stuff the same, just in a kind of 3D world space. So that was cool.
And it looks really nice because we don't see many procedural generation in 3D spaces being done as it happens. So it's really cool. Just another question. So
Hmm.
the something that makes the gifs you've doing so interesting is that you have the moment whoop, when they all sort of move out of the way. Is that a technique that you came up with, or were you inspired by other techniques, or it's something that you just coded and worked?
You mean the pushing the
Yeah, the
rooms
pushing thing.
aside?
Yeah.
Like it's literally just solving a problem that I wanted a exact same number of rooms. I wasn't aware of any of the usual techniques that procedural generation programmers use, such as I don't know, Monte Carlo or Poisson distribution or something like that. I think I would have used something like that now, or some kind of a box packing algorithm or something. I didn't. There's a lot of stuff out there in procedure generation that, unless you know what to look for, is really, really difficult to find out what you need in order to achieve a certain result. So the way that I've done it is very much based on like instinct. It's like, how do I get rooms to not overlap? Oh, I just push them to away from each other like I do in real life. So oh, I'll just code that in. It's fine. It'll work. Rather than try and think of like what algorithms out there that are mathematically sound or have been used in previous projects without knowing what to look for, right? So
And
yeah,
it works, and it worked
it
really
works.
well
Yeah.
actually. So
And the benefit is it looks cool, right? Like you can see it happening, and it's more intuitive that way, and maybe that's why it was kind of so popular.
does he have a name, this technique, or should we call it the Phi algorithm?
I think if you search, like most people know it as the tiny keep dungeon generation, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, we can go into that. And I have to say, I joined the team of lecturers that have that GIF in their slides. So I'm one of them as well now. I've joined the I've joined the team. But yeah, and I think that it's really interesting because procedural generation, it's something that, and we discussed this last week. Was it last week? I don't remember. No, maybe 2 weeks ago. I've lost sense of time, guys. Help me. With Tom Betts, which is the master of procedural generation, the fact that every developer that needs PCG stuff uses a different technique
Yeah.
because it's such a bespoken, such a specific problem that everyone came up with their own technique. And they all have similar tools, so they all use randomness in some way. They all use some generation in their own ways, but the fine details, they're unique. And so almost every game has its own algorithm. And I found this really interesting, when it comes to PCG content.
I mean, a lot of games we don't even realize they have procedure generation. A lot of them might use PCG offline, in order to help their level design, and that's also interesting to me as well.
It's yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
kind of nice. So I didn't hear any bad comments, so I hope that the audio is bearable. If that's not the
Hopefully.
case, please let us know. Uh, Today has been very stressful.
It's been great. It's been great.
So there's another question that I want to ask you, and it's a question that I ask everyone who has been on the stream. How many versions of Unity do you have? And I'm particularly interested to know this because of all the different platforms you're working on right now. So how many
actually,
versions do you have?
the answer is that on Monday I had one. Today I have five because of you.
No, it's my fault.
It's your fault 'cause I had to record all of these videos, right? So I had
Oh
to dig
no, I
up.
didn't know that. I thought you had them already.
No, well, what I did, but they were kind of not HD. So if I wanted to get something nice for you, so I dug up all the old projects. I actually got out my old PC, which is a GTX 970, out of the cupboard, set it all up in on the sofa next to my office, and we went through all of the old projects and recorded each one. So each one needed a different Unity project. So I start 4.6, and there's a 5.4, there's a 5.6, a 2017 or 2018, and a 2019, which is the current one. So yeah, I now have five Unity versions on my PC right now.
You have no idea the amount of guilt, the Unity guilt that I have now, knowing that you had to install 5 different versions.
I had to install 4.6, and going back to that was crazy because it just looks so different now.
Oh my god, yeah. Even more different now that the UI has completely changed. But yeah, now I feel so bad.
Yeah, maybe I should have put all of the projects under source control, but they're so old that I didn't even use source control at that time, so I had it on the hard drive.
But yeah, we really had something like 20 gigabytes of video. So I think the people were watching the show realized that we had a lot of videos.
We actually had 30 gigabytes, but I had to cut it down to 20 because I knew you probably couldn't be able to download it all in time for the stream as well.
So actually, I was trying to download the entire folder, and Dropbox wasn't having it. It was just cutting out the download after a few megabytes. I don't know why.
I appreciate the effort.
So I had to do downloading manually, like 50, maybe more. It's like 70 files, one by one. So please appreciate that. So if people want to find you, where they can find you?
I guess quickest way to find me is Twitter. So Phi6, PHI, and then the number 6 is the easiest way. And from there, you can get access to my website, which has links to all the projects I worked on, as well as Recompile as well. And if I would be doing my publisher a disservice if I didn't tell everyone that you can wishlist Recompile on Steam as well. So that's something that I have to do.
No. You would do yourself. You like people watching. You would do yourself a disservice if you're not wishlist Recompile on Steam. I think
it's easier to blame the publisher. So.
Not many games pack that amount of shitty goodness. I think I should like register that shitty goodness as a proper as a proper term now for the show. But so for the people watching, stay around because I will introduce the new guest, and I will give a shout out to the Patreon for the show. But with that being said, Phi, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know we had technical issues, but hopefully we can solve them. People are saying that the echo is back.
Oh no!
I can't cope with this.
Well, the timing is great.
The timing is great, but at least hopefully the Skype part is over. But thank you so much, Phi. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Even without the echo.
Lovely to hear. I really enjoyed it, and good luck with the next show, especially audio issues. Hopefully you can sort that out.
Hopefully there won't be any. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So now that Skype is finally closed, hopefully there shouldn't be any audio issue. If there are, I'm going absolutely crazy. There's something very dodgy going on today. But so, with that being said, I can finally introduce the guest that we are going to have next week. It's Mark Buckler. If you're a London indie, you know him as one of the first London indies. I've been knowing for a lot of years, maybe 8 years, I don't know, something like that. Almost for as long, like when I joined London Indies the first time, he was there. He's the founder of Game Sketchbooks and the developer of a narrative game called Lost Words Beyond the Page. He's also an ex-Lionhead, Kuju, EA, Sony. He has done a lot of stuff. He's also a Stuganeer, if that's a word, I guess. So I think it was maybe in the first round of people attending Stugan, which was his lovely, very bucolic retreat where people make games in the woods. Amazing stuff. I was actually really, I was actually wanted to apply, but I was like, I'm not sure about that. Biggest regret. Biggest regret. I should have totally been there. And also BAFTA crew member. So honestly, can't wait to see what he's been up to. I know since when I met him, he was working on this game. So it's been a long journey and I can't wait to hear all about the struggle and the successes, because I know that now the game won several awards already. So really interested to see how the journey was, and I think it could be quite an inspirational one for people that want to make a game and they realize that they have to spend so much time making it. After all, Phi himself started working on the game in 2014. So if you really want a game to be done, keep working on it, and eventually it will happen if you keep hitting on the game. Now, with that being said, on to the final part of the show and on to the thank you. So I want to give a shout out to the new Patreon that have joined this week. So hi Alexander Rivo, hi Harvin Sloan, hi Eduardas Klenauskis. Yes, I hope I said it correctly. Hi Gary McCartan, hi Gianmarco Simone, hi Igor Duzevich, hi Jason, hi John Warren, hi UKL, hi Zili Chan, hi Slop, hi Tan Yao Jushi. I hope I pronounced that correctly as well, but you know, it's a big struggle with all those names. So as you can see here on the side, those are all the people that have been supporting my work on Patreon and supporting the show as well. So it's not joking when I'm saying this show wouldn't be possible without the support of all these people. So thank you so much for believing in the work I do and in the show, despite the audio issues that we had today. Now, as a small update, Patreon has been recently released a new option. So on top of the usual monthly fee you can pay, now you can now have an annual membership, which means that you can pay upfront for 12 months. And if you do that, you also have 2 months discount. So if you've been following my work for a long time, you can switch to that. I hope you can trust me to keep making content for 1 year. I've been doing it for 5 years, so trust me, I'm not going to run away with the money yet. But if that's if the content I make here on YouTube or on Patreon, it's content you're interested on and you're planning on keep supporting that for a long time, that's something you can do. And I think it helps everyone because I can have the amount of money a bit before and you have a discount of a couple of months on the subscription. So it's something that hopefully can help everyone. A few people have already switched, so thank you so much for that. Now, another thing, as you probably know, I'm working on a video about Conway's Game of Life. I can say that the editing is finally done. There are a couple of things to fix, but it's mostly done, so I'm really excited. It will be released in October to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the publication of the first article in Scientific American that was talking about Conway's Game of Life. It's about 25-ish minutes, short documentary, bunch of work. So it will include the names of all the people that have been supporting me for the past 3 months, because this is how long it has been taking to make these videos. And I will finalize it on the first week of September. So if you're watching the show and you want your name to be in the video, you still have a few days to join. Up to, I think, the first or second week of September, the people that have joined Patreon will end up in the video. I'm also quite excited because it's all rendered on paper. Part is rendered on an old 3.11 Windows 3.11 screen, so it's kind of interesting. And the credit scene as well, where all the names of the people supporting the video are. It's done in a sort of those continuous feed paper, which I love it. I love the aesthetic. dot print matrices. Oh, so excited to have it watch it. And if you're I believe yes, it's a 5. If you're on a $5 tier, in a couple of weeks maybe you will have a snippet from the first part of the video, so you can see a bit of a preview of the video. Not too much, maybe the first minute or so, but I hope that will be enough for you to be curious about what's coming next. To be honest, I wasn't sure if making YouTube videos was a thing I wanted to do, but the reception for Gamedev Graveyard has been awesome. A lot of people really love the videos about the Eye of Creatures, so I'm planning of keep making videos like these and short documentaries. It just takes a lot of time for the content I want to make. I'm not a factory of videos like Tommy Thompson is, that they can publish a video every month or so. It takes me months. I'm probably not at that level, but thank you so much for sticking around and and believing in the content that I do. It was really what pushed me in saying, yes, I can keep doing this. I can keep editing video for 12 hours a day. Yes, I can do it. Now, with that being said, thank you so much for watching this evening or today, depending where you are in the world. And I hope to see you next time. Hopefully without any audio issues. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.